We're going to move on to your next performer storyteller, and when I asked him what was a time that he had decided to throw caution to the wind, he told me that in high school he decided it would be smart to sneak into his girlfriend's dorm room with a bottle of rum. He got caught and kicked out by the headmaster, who also was his father. Please put your hands together for Mike Steinberg.
In 1997, I was appointed to be the legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan. I loved the ACLU and was elated, but I also had some anxiety about whether I was up to the task. You see, I viewed the ACLU as the most important organization in this country that kept the United States true to its stated values of freedom, of liberty, and of equality. And I saw the ACLU as the organization that prevented our country from slipping into the police states that we see across the world. So there was a lot of pressure on me. My anxiety only increased, though, when early in my tenure, they sent me to a national ACLU conference for state legal directors. And the talent in the room was intimidating. It seemed like they all went to Harvard or Yale Law School. They clerked for some fancy judge, and many of them had already argued in the US Supreme Court. Me, I was a high school teacher and basketball and soccer coach, and I did a little political organizing before going to a state law school. And I just didn't know how I was going to match their accomplishments. And I was very concerned that someday I would do something stupid that would embarrass them and make them laugh about that imposter in Michigan. But being the coach that I was, I gave myself a pep talk. And I said to myself, you may not have the fancy credentials of your colleagues, but there's nobody who works harder than you or cares more about social justice than you. And sure, you're going to be working around the clock for little pay, and you're not going to have any fun. But this is your opportunity of a lifetime to make a difference. So stop whining and get out there and kick some civil liberties butt. And I said, okay, coach, put me in, I'm ready. And the first year went as planned. I was working to defend affirmative action at the University of Michigan in a case that eventually went to the US Supreme Court. I was fighting against racial profiling in a Detroit suburb in a case that became known as the Biking While Black case. I was working for women's rights and LGBT rights and voting rights and immigrant rights, and things were going great until in the summer of 1998, I got a call, and I could tell it was from somebody who wanted help. And truth be told, I didn't really like these calls because we can only help like 1 out of 100 people. And it takes time, and my assistant was on the other line, so I was stuck listening to him. He said his name was Timothy Boomer. And he wanted our help because he was charged with the crime of swearing. And I rolled my eyes and I said, this is not why I came to the ACLU. But he persisted on telling the story, and what happened was he was canoeing down the Rifle River in northern Michigan when his canoe hit a rock and he capsized, and his friends were laughing at him and he was splashing them, and he admitted to using a few choice words. And out of nowhere came this other canoe with a cop in it, and the cop paddled over and issued him a ticket for swearing in front of women and children. At this point, I thought it was a practical joke, and it wouldn't have been the first time that friends called up to pretend like they needed help. But he seemed serious, so I said, okay, Mr. Boomer, somebody will get back to you. And I was curious, so I did some quick research, and sure enough, still on the books was this law from the 1890s in Michigan that made it a misdemeanor punishable by up to 90 days in jail for using improper, indecent, or immoral language in the presence of women or children. And I called Boomer up and I said, this is ridiculous. We're going to help you make these charges go away. And I told myself I'm going to make them go away quickly so I could get back to my real cases. So I called up the prosecutor and I said, what are you doing charging this man with a law that's clearly unconstitutional? I'm from the ACLU, and we'd like to ask you to dismiss the case. And he said, the ACLU? I've never gotten a call from the ACLU. I'm sorry, I can't dismiss the charge, but I'll make you a deal. If Boomer pleads guilty and doesn't get in trouble in the next year, the judge will dismiss the case. So I call Boomer up, and I say, Mr. Boomer, mind you, when I usually make these calls, I encourage our clients to stand up for their rights and stand on their principle and fight the power. But this was a different case. I said, Mr. Boomer, this sounds like a pretty good deal. You can be done with this fiasco, and you won't have the risk of a criminal conviction following you around for the rest of your life. Boomer thought about it for a second, and he decided that he was going to stand on his principle, and he said, let's fight this thing. And I was stuck representing him. I call up a volunteer attorney who's one of the top criminal defense lawyers in the state, and he agreed to help us, which was a relief because I thought he could do most of the work. And I hoped that the case would go away quietly. But then the media got wind of the case. And I was used to doing interviews with local reporters about ACLU cases, but this became a national sensation. And mainly because they decided to dub Timothy Boomer the Cussing Canoeist. And I'm working away, and the phone rings, and it's MSNBC, and they want me to go down to a studio in Detroit that afternoon and do a live broadcast about the Cussing Canoeist case. And I said, I'm sorry, I took the van pool to work today, and there's no way I'd be able to get home if I spoke on your show. And they said, don't worry, and they sent a stretch limousine to pick me up. I'd never been in a limousine before. They bring me down. They put makeup on me so my face wouldn't shine, and they mic me up. And before I know it, I'm in front of these bright lights on national television. And I'm nervous at first, but I hit my stride, and I start talking about how un-American it was to have speech police lurking in the bushes. And I talked about how dangerous it was to criminalize a whole range of speech that most Americans use. And it went well, but the media kept coming. We got a call from NPR, New York Times wanted to cover the case. My mom called me and she heard me talking about the Cussing Canoeist on the BBC. And I have to admit, I started to like the attention a little bit. But then I started getting calls from legal directors from other state ACLUs. And they said, what the hell is going on in Michigan? I have people, they said, in my state that want me to represent them in a swearing case. And who the hell is the Cussing Canoeist? And my worst nightmare had come true. I felt like I was an embarrassment to my colleagues, and I didn't know what to do, but I didn't have a choice because we had already committed to Boomer, and I had an ethical duty to continue. And besides, the media storm was starting to subside. Then I got a call from a lawyer from Court TV. He said Court TV wanted to cover the case from gavel to gavel, and he wanted to make sure that I didn't have an objection to his motion to allow TV cameras into the courtroom. And I told myself, of course I have an objection. This is going to ruin my life. But I told him, as an organization that supports freedom of the press and transparency, I do not have an objection. On June 10th, 1999, with considerable dread, I walk into the so-called courthouse with Timothy Boomer and our cooperating attorney. It was actually just a municipal building in a northern Michigan town with one stoplight, and the courtroom was this tiny, tiny room in the basement of the municipal building. Present were 8 very earnest jurors, a flock of reporters who were snickering the whole time, and Court TV, which was broadcasting to the nation our every move. And despite thinking to myself that this was the most absurd trial in the history of the United States, I tried to project an air of being serious because the jury was very serious, the judge was very serious, and the fate of our client remained in their hands. Things were going great until the prosecutor called his key witness. It was a man who was canoeing with his wife and child nearby to Boomer on that fateful day. And eventually the prosecutor asked the witness, "Sir, what did Mr. Boomer say when he fell out of the canoe?" And the man had been very shy up to this point. He'd been looking at his feet most of the time. But he looks over to the judge and he says, "Your Honor, I can't say those words. I'm a Christian man." And the judge looked back at him and said, "You're going to be okay, sir. I'm sorry, but you have no choice. You're under oath, and you must tell us what Mr. Boomer said when he fell out of the canoe." And so this supposedly shy man, without being prompted, decides to stand up in the witness stand, and he starts screaming at the top of his lungs, "Fuck, fuck, 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 fuck." And the prosecutor says, okay, you can sit down now. How many times did he say that word? And he said 50 to 75 times. And at this point, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I was biting my hand as hard as I can, trying not to burst out laughing, and Court TV was eating it up. Every commercial that Court TV had for the next week was this guy standing up in the witness stand and saying, "Bleep, bleep, 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 bleep." Unfortunately, based on this testimony, it didn't take the jury long to find Mr. Boomer guilty of using improper language. But we appealed, and the Michigan Court of Appeals, in a unanimous published decision, reversed the conviction and struck down the law as unconstitutional in a case called People of the State of Michigan versus Boomer. And that's a case we still use to this day when we represent political protesters. And 2 years ago, the state legislature actually repealed the law. And rather than being the laughingstock of the ACLU, we actually started a trend. And other state affiliates started bringing these cases until the prosecutors stopped abusing their power and stopped charging people with crimes for swearing. In the end, Mr. Boomer was thrilled that he stood on his principles and refused to plead guilty to an unconstitutional law. And me, I learned that not only can you defend constitutional rights, but you can have a fucking good time doing it.